Okay, so this happened back in the fall of 2019. My cousin Danny and I decided to take a short trip into the woods. We're not exactly outdoorsy people, but we'd both been feeling burned out from work and thought a little nature would do us some good. I found this cabin listed on a rental site. It was tucked deep in the woods near a place called Black Hollow in northern Vermont. The pictures made it look really cozy, small but charming. Perfect for a quiet weekend. The owner had a few other identical cabins scattered across their land, but each one was spaced far enough apart that you didn't see or hear anyone else. There weren't really any official paths connecting them, just some faint trails that looked like they were made when the cabins were first being built. No signs, no lights, just trees and dirt. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The sun was dipping behind the trees, casting these long shadows that made everything look twice as eerie. The cabin was nice enough inside. Wood walls, tiny kitchen, a fireplace, 2 beds, and a creaky front porch. No TV, barely any phone signal. That was kind of the point though, right? The first night was uneventful. We made dinner, sat by the fire, and played cards until we got bored and went to bed. It wasn't until the second day that things got weird. I slept in pretty late. Danny was already up and outside taking pictures for his Instagram or whatever. I brewed some coffee and chilled by the fire for a bit. Around 4:30 or so, just before sunset, I decided to stretch my legs and take a walk. I told Danny I'd be back in 30 minutes and headed out the back, where one of those faint trails started. The trail was narrow and barely noticeable in spots. It twisted through the trees, all quiet except for the wind brushing through the branches. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something strange. Off in the distance, maybe a few hundred feet away through the trees, I saw 2 people. 2 men. They weren't walking or talking. They weren't doing anything, really. Just standing there, completely still. Both of them looking down at the ground. I couldn't see what they were looking at. It almost looked like they were in some kind of trance. I slowed down and stared for a bit, trying to make sense of it. They didn't move, didn't glance up. Just stood there like statues. I figured maybe they were from another cabin. Maybe they were just weird. I shook it off and kept walking. But after a while I realized the trail wasn't looping like I thought it would. It just kept going straight, deeper and deeper into the woods. And the further I walked, the more I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like the trees were pressing in a little tighter. Like I was being watched. I stopped. Something didn't feel right. Then I heard it. A low, bellowing scream behind me. Not close, but not far either. The sound echoed through the trees. It wasn't an animal I recognized. It sounded warped, like someone trying to imitate an animal but not getting it quite right. My stomach dropped. I turned around. The 2 men were now on the trail, standing behind me. They were closer this time, maybe 100 feet away, still, silent, watching. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I couldn't, my brain just froze. The scream didn't sound like it came from them, but it came right before they appeared. After about 10 seconds, I started stepping backwards. That's when they slowly turned and walked off the trail, back into the trees, just like that. No rush, no fear, like they knew exactly what they were doing. I stood there for another few minutes just trying to catch my breath. Eventually, I turned and hurried back the way I came, constantly checking over my shoulder. I made it back to the cabin just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Danny was inside messing with the fire. I didn't tell him much, just that I heard something weird and wanted to stay in for the night. He didn't ask questions. I tried to relax. Made some tea. Sat by the fireplace. But I couldn't shake that feeling. Like I had been seen. Not just looked at, but seen, if that makes sense. Then about 30 minutes later, we heard it again. That same scream, louder this time. Still far off, but closer than before. I froze. Danny looked at me, confused. "What the hell was that?" he asked. I didn't answer. Just went to the window and looked out. It was too dark to see anything. Just shadows and outlines of trees. We didn't leave the cabin the rest of the night. Around 9 p.m., we were both sitting by the fire when we heard footsteps on the front porch. Heavy, deliberate steps. They stopped right in front of the door. Neither of us moved, then a knock. Slow and steady. Danny mouthed, "Don't answer." I crept toward the door and peeked through the peephole. 2 men, same height, same build, both wearing cheap plastic animal masks, the kind you find at dollar stores around Halloween. One was a deer, the other a rabbit. Their hoodies were pulled up and they stood unnervingly still, like they weren't waiting for anything, just being there. I backed away and whispered to Danny to call the police. He fumbled with his phone, trying to get a signal. The knock came again, louder this time. We didn't speak. Didn't breathe. Just waited. Then, bang. Something slammed against the door. Hard. It rattled on its hinges. Danny finally got a signal and started talking to the dispatcher. Meanwhile, I looked out again. The men were gone. We waited, huddled together with the fireplace as our only light, until a police car showed up about 40 minutes later. The officer found a long, deep gouge in the door, like someone had dragged a knife down it. He asked us a bunch of questions, took a statement, then patrolled the area but didn't find anyone. We left the next morning, packed up and drove away without saying a word. We never heard back from the cops and I never saw anything in the news. No break-ins, no missing people, nothing, but I check. Every few months I search for anything about Black Hollow. And every time I feel that same cold pit in my stomach, because I know they're still out there, waiting in those woods, watching, and they remember me. So this happened in the summer of 2022. My cousin Jake had just landed this sweet new job with some tech company that worked with hospitals across the country. He'd been doing IT stuff for years, but this new gig meant he'd be flying to different cities every few weeks to help set up systems or fix problems on site. Not bad, right? Jake didn't have a family or anything keeping him tied down. Just a tiny apartment in Milwaukee and a dog named Bean that his neighbor would watch while he was away. So yeah, he was pretty pumped about all the travel. He'd been working the job for about 8 months when this weird trip happened. It was somewhere in Missouri, this little town called St. Crest, way out near Dalton Hill. Ever heard of it? No? Neither had Jake. It wasn't even on most GPS apps. He had to look it up on some old-looking website just to get directions. Normally, when the company sent him places, they'd put him in hotels, nice ones too. But this time, for whatever reason, they booked him into an Airbnb. Not just any Airbnb. A giant, creepy house that looked like it came out of a horror movie. Jake got in late. Like really late. His flight had been delayed. Then he had to pick up his rental car, then drive 40 minutes into what felt like the middle of nowhere. It was almost 1 in the morning by the time he pulled up to the place, and this place was insane. It wasn't just a regular house. It was a mansion. 3 stories, wraparound porch, ivy crawling up the brick walls. The kind of place that used to belong to a wealthy family who probably had weird secrets. It had that presence, you know what I mean? That silent, heavy feeling when a building has seen too much. Jake double-checked the address like 3 times. It matched. He was sure. But he still sat in the car for a solid 5 minutes, just staring at the place. The windows were all dark. There were no cars in the driveway. No lights in the yard. Just him and the chirping of crickets and the way too loud sound of his own heartbeat. Eventually, he grabbed his bags and went in. The front door was already unlocked, which he thought was odd. But hey, some hosts do that for late check-ins, right? Inside, it was a different story. The place smelled like old wood and lemon-scented cleaner. Not bad, just strong. Everything was super old school. Patterned wallpaper, floral couches, heavy curtains, wooden furniture that looked hand-carved. It was clean, but something about it didn't sit right. Jake didn't explore much that first night. He was too tired. He just found the bedroom upstairs, dumped his bags, and flopped into bed. But the second he turned off the lights, he realized something. This house was noisy. Like really noisy. Every few seconds he'd hear something creak, shift, or groan. At first he thought it was the wind or maybe the pipes, but the longer he listened, the more it sounded like Movement. Like floorboards flexing under weight, like someone walking slow and steady across the floor. But every time he sat up and strained his ears, the sound stopped. He brushed it off, told himself it was just a big old house settling. He tried to sleep. But after tossing and turning for an hour, he finally gave up and decided to get some water. He shuffled down the long hallway and creaky stairs. But the moment he hit the first floor, silence, dead quiet, no more creaks, no more footsteps. The house was still, completely still. It felt wrong, like the quiet was waiting. Jake didn't bother turning on any lights. He didn't want to see too much. He grabbed a glass from the kitchen, filled it up, and headed straight back to bed. This time the sounds didn't come back, and eventually he fell asleep. The next morning was rushed. He had to be at the clinic by 9 a.m., and of course he overslept. He barely had time to brush his teeth and toss on his shirt. He only glanced around the place while making his way out. Nothing strange, yet. He spent the whole day at work, then grabbed a drink with some of the techs afterward. He didn't make it back to the house until after 11 p.m., and even though he was exhausted, curiosity got the better of him. He figured he should finally check the place out. So he started walking room to room. There was a sitting room with old books and faded portraits on the wall. A parlor with covered furniture and a grand piano that had thick dust on the keys. A dining room with a long wooden table that looked like it could seat 12 people, but only 11 chairs. Every room had something just a little bit off. A cold spot, a weird smell, a light that flickered for no reason. And then there was the kitchen. When Jake walked in, he stopped in his tracks. One of the chairs at the table was pulled out. He knew, absolutely knew, that all the chairs had been pushed in the night before. He hadn't sat down. He hadn't even been in the kitchen long enough. And yet here it was, pulled out like someone had just been sitting there. He stared at it for a while. Then, reluctantly pushed it back under the table, trying to shake off the weird feeling. He headed upstairs, showered, and got into bed. Then, just as he started to drift off in a creak, it was back. The sounds were louder this time, more deliberate. Like real footsteps, step, step, step. He sat up, held his breath, listened, and then came the soft, unmistakable sound of a drawer sliding open. Then another. Then, slam. Jake's skin crawled. This wasn't the house settling. This wasn't the wind. Someone was downstairs. He got up, slowly opened the bedroom door, and stepped into the hallway. The noises didn't stop. If anything, they got louder, closer. He tiptoed down the hall and started down the staircase. The moment his foot touched the third step, everything stopped. Total silence, and that's when he noticed something. A faint light coming from the kitchen. Jake knew he turned off all the lights, all of them. Heart pounding, he walked toward the glow. Each step felt heavier than the last. He peeked around the corner and froze. That same kitchen chair pulled out again, and just beyond it in the shadowy back room, a face, pale, expressionless. Watching him from the dark, Jake didn't move. Neither did the figure. They stared at each other in silence for what felt like forever. Then the figure vanished behind the wall. A door slammed shut. Jake ran. He flicked on the lights, sprinted to where the figure had been, but nothing. No one. Not even a door, just a solid wall. He turned and bolted upstairs, grabbed his phone, and ran out of the house in his pajamas. He got in the car and drove down the hill, not stopping until he hit the gas station 10 miles out. He called the police. The police showed up, checked the house, but of course, nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints, and no explanation for the slamming door because there wasn't a door there. Not anymore, at least. The Airbnb host didn't help much either. He acted all confused, like Jake was making it up. Said the house hadn't had issues before, but the way he kept glancing away, avoiding eye contact, Jake didn't trust it. The company moved him to a hotel the next day. He finished his work week and left Missouri as fast as he could, but he never got any answers. He never saw the figure's face clearly, and to this day he swears that house wasn't empty. Not entirely. Sometimes when we're hanging out and the topic of scary stories comes up, Jake will tell this one. Always in that calm, steady voice of his, but you can see it in his eyes. That look, the kind of look people get when they know something they saw them and let them leave. So this happened back in the fall of 2019, when I was 23 years old and doing a solo road trip across the country. Just me, my little Honda, and a playlist full of weird podcasts. I was heading from Oregon to Georgia, taking my time, stopping wherever I felt like it. Somewhere around the halfway mark, just outside a small town called Millersfield, Illinois, I decided to stay a couple nights to rest and see my cousin Max. He and I hadn't hung out in years, and his place was only an hour from there. I booked a place through a rental app. It was a simple one-story home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy. The pictures looked plain but clean. The host's name was Dale and he had good reviews, so I didn't think twice. I got there pretty late. It was around 11 p.m. The neighborhood was dead quiet, just dark houses and a few porch lights glowing in the distance. I had received an email from Dale earlier that day with the code for the front door lockbox, so I figured I'd just let myself in and crash. I was exhausted. I parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the cool night air. I was pulling my duffel bag from the back seat when I heard footsteps. Slow, steady ones coming up behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping my bag. A man was standing just a few feet away in the dim glow of the porch light. Late 30s maybe, tall, pale, wearing a faded gray hoodie. He smiled like we knew each other. "Hey," he said. "You must be Aaron, I'm Dale." Now I don't know about you, but I wasn't expecting to meet him. Most hosts don't bother showing up in person, and the way he just appeared, silently in the dark, really threw me off. Still, I nodded. Yeah, thanks for letting me stay." "No problem," he said. "Thought I'd stop by and make sure you got in okay." Before I could respond, he reached out and grabbed my other bag like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Here, I'll show you around real quick." Too tired to argue, I followed him up the steps. He unlocked the door, walked in like it was his own house, well, I guess it was, and started pointing things out. Kitchen, bathroom, thermostat instructions. His voice was calm, casual, but I couldn't relax. Something about him made my skin crawl. He moved too quietly. His eyes stayed on me a little too long. When we got to the bedroom, he paused in the doorway. "Nice and quiet back here," he said, like that was supposed to be comforting. "No one will bother you." Then he gave me a half smile and disappeared down the hall. I stood there for a second, waiting to hear the front door open and close. Nothing. I crept back out into the hallway. No Dale. I walked to the living room, empty. Kitchen, empty. I checked the front door. It was closed, but not locked. I stepped out on the porch. No sign of him. Maybe he left quietly. Maybe he parked down the street and just walked off. Or maybe he was still inside. I locked the door and tried to shake it off. I didn't see him anywhere and I needed sleep. So I unpacked a little, changed into sweats, and passed out. The next morning I spent a few hours catching up with Max. We grabbed lunch, talked about old times, and laughed more than I had in months. Around noon I headed back to the rental to chill for the rest of the day. I didn't have plans to go out again except maybe to grab dinner later. When I got back to the house, I noticed something weird right away. The front door was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I even remembered jiggling the handle to make sure. My heart skipped a beat. I stood there for a moment listening, trying to sense if anything was off. Then I stepped inside. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone here?" Silence. The lights were all off. Nothing looked out of place. But still, that uneasy feeling in my chest came back. I shut the door and locked it again. Maybe I'd just been distracted this morning and forgot. Maybe. I tossed my food on the table and collapsed onto the couch, flipping on the TV. I was halfway through a rerun of some cooking show when I heard it, a soft thump. It came from the back of the house. Like something or someone had hit the wall. Not hard, but enough to be heard over the TV. I muted the sound and listened. Nothing. You ever get that feeling when your brain tells you, don't look, but your body's already moving? I got up and started walking down the hallway. The sound had come from the far end of the house near a room I hadn't looked in yet. The door was slightly open. I pushed it gently and peeked inside. It was a weird little room. Not a bedroom. No windows. Just a dusty old couch pushed against one wall and a small wooden table with a lamp. The kind of room that feels unfinished, like someone meant to turn it into something but gave up halfway. I turned on the light and looked around. That's when I noticed it. Behind the couch, just above the backrest, there was a narrow seam in the wall. Not a crack, more like a hidden panel. I moved closer, heart thumping in my chest. I reached over and pulled the couch away. It screeched loudly on the hardwood floor. And there it was, a tiny door. Maybe 3 feet tall with a little round handle. It looked old. Like really old. The paint was chipped. The wood was dry and splintered. I bent down and tried to open it. Locked. No keyhole. No visible lock on the outside. I ran my fingers around the edges. Just smooth wall and that tiny door. Something about it made me feel sick. Like I was standing next to something I wasn't supposed to know about. I took out my phone and called Dale. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I texted, hey, there's a weird little door behind the couch in the back room. Is that supposed to be there? Nothing. I stared at the door. I should have walked away. Should have gone back to the living room and tried to forget about it. But instead I pressed my hand against it lightly. It moved. The door creaked open just an inch. It was unlocked now. I froze. I hadn't heard a sound. No click, no footsteps. But now the door was open, and inside it was pitch black. I leaned forward and saw the start of a staircase, narrow, steep, and made of rotting wood. It went down into darkness, no light, no railing, and on the back of the little door I saw it. A manual bolt lock. The kind you slide from the inside. That meant someone had unlocked it. From inside, my whole body went cold. I stood there frozen, staring into that black hole in the wall. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. Then I backed away, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I turned off the light, pulled the couch back in front of the door, and went straight to the bedroom. I needed to leave now. I threw everything into my bags without folding or sorting, just stuffing and zipping. I kept looking over my shoulder at the hallway, waiting to see a shadow, a face, anything. Then I heard it again. Creak, a floorboard. Somewhere just outside my room. I grabbed both suitcases, yanked open the bedroom door and bolted. I didn't stop to turn off the lights. I didn't check behind me. I ran down the hall through the living room and yanked open the front door, slam. It shut right behind me. Hard. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, tossed the bags into the back and sped off. I didn't stop until I hit the next town and checked into a cheap motel. From there, I tried calling Dale again. Texted him a bunch. Asked if he was okay. Asked what that room was. Never got a reply. I checked the listing the next day. It was gone. Completely removed from the app. No history, no record. Like it had never been there. I have no idea what was down those stairs. Maybe it was just an old basement. Maybe. But I know this. Someone was down there that night. Someone opened that door while I was in the house. And if I'd gone down those steps, I don't think I ever would have come back up.